It would be nice to get rid of the ANC in this country. Iran cleared the ANC's debt. So the ANC is Iran's lapdog, and hence the ICJ court application against Israel, and Iran says jump and the ANC says how high. The ANC is not a single voice. You've got communists in the ANC, you've got trade unionists in the ANC, you've got lunatics, incompetents, morons, you've got everyone, clowns, you've got the whole gang. And it's impossible now for Cyril to speak with one voice and represent what the ANC stands for and means. It doesn't stand for anything except corruption, incompetence, and taking money from whoever will give it to them. They're that bunch of prostitutes now. To Trump, I think we're on track for a very, very good next 4 years. America and the world.
South Africa?
Well, I think South Africa is irrelevant. I think Donald Trump is not particularly interested in Africa, and I doubt South Africa is even on his radar. Our moronic ANC, supporting the rogue states of Russia, China, and Iran, are going to get some tough medicine at some point from Trump. And
yeah, guys, in the wake of Donald Trump's victory against Kamala Harris, a lot of economists around the world are beginning to consider what Donald Trump's victory would actually imply for them. The EU, Australia, the UK, there's been a lot of debate already going on how a Donald Trump victory would actually influence their countries. And South Africa is not left out. A lot of people have actually been arguing about the prospects of the GNU in the event of a Donald Trump victory, although we know that the GNU is actually divided into almost what might be seen as two blocks, with the ANC seeming to side a lot with the leftist, Russian and China in terms of ideology and economics, and while the DA and some other of these parties, like I think the PA and other center-right parties, actually favor more relationship with the West, the likes in trade partners like the EU and also the United States of America. So it's really tricky how Donald Trump's policies. Now, we know that Donald Trump is actually the one for, kicking foreigners out, actually one for building borders, actually one for imposing tariffs and not allowing goods, flood into the US. And so how that whole mix would actually affect business, with countries that actually do business with the United States is actually something really big. And Rob Hersov in this video is actually breaking that down, actually exposing and explaining the impact of a Donald Trump victory on South Africa's economy, which is really important to really understand as South Africans and also as Africans generally. I know one of the things he speaks about is that he actually thinks, and actually it comes clear from this interview, that Donald Trump doesn't care about Africa, and so nonetheless South Africa. And so with the likes of how he thinks Donald Trump will relate to the GNU, I think it's a really important thing to listen. So let's watch Rob Hersov break down the impact of Trump's victory on South Africa. And I'll be back for some really interesting analysis I found on the Daily Maverick.
And I am thrilled. I think the world is in a much better place, and it would be even better if we can make South Africa great again. But, I called Trump at 285. He's going to probably go through 300. So, I always disbelieve mainstream media in America. And once celebrities start endorsing someone, it's a surefire way for that person to lose. No one listens to celebrities or elites talking down to people. They look at the facts. And a lot of people don't like Donald's character, myself included. But you've got to look past him and look at his policies, what he intends to do, who are the people around him. And the fact is, he's been president already for 4 years before. He's had 4 years in the waiting room to stew, to think about what he could do better. And he's going to hit the ground running. He's actually going to hit the ground very quickly. He knows exactly the people he wants to put in place and exactly the policies he wants to implement. And he's got a seriously big mandate from the voters in America to implement those policies. So I'm very positive about the world, where the world is today. All we've got to do is get rid of Keir Starmer and the Labour Party in the UK, some lefty in Australia, I can't remember his name, and the dreadful Trudeau in Canada. And the Western civilization is back on the correct trajectory. And of course, it would be nice to get rid of the ANC in this country. So the people that I speak to are mainly investors, corporate chieftains, heads of institutions, business people. And every single one of them, publicly or quietly in private, said, we're backing Trump. Anyone who's from a communist or socialist country that lives in America now says we just cannot. We've seen socialism and communism. They don't work. They're destructive. They're evil. They kill people. And Kamala is closer to that socialist world than Trump. Trump is a business person. We need more business people in politics. I agree with that. We're voting for Trump. A lot of people, actually, like Bill Ackman, who was a lifelong Democrat, went public and said, I'm now backing Trump. I'm a Republican. But also very impressive, successful people like Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, and others, came said, on record, we're with Trump. And I follow those people. I think they're the smartest people of all, those business successes. And all of them back Trump. So it was the business, I'm not going to say elites, because I leave elites for the Democrats, but it was the business success stories, the workers, males, huge swing in blacks and Latinos to Trump, big swing in under 30s to Trump, and he deserves it. He deserves the victory. He's won the popular vote, he's won the Senate, he's won the House. He's got his mandate to get rid of woke, get rid of DEI, to get rid of ESG, get rid of identity politics, to get rid of men competing in women's sports, and all of this rubbish that has come in via the left. And I think we're on track for a very, very good next 4 years. America and the world.
And the world and South Africa? South Africa?
Well, I think South Africa is irrelevant. I think Donald Trump is not particularly interested in Africa, and I doubt South Africa is even on his radar. But the fact is that our moronic ANC, because they're being bribed by the Iranians through MTN structures, trust me, I think our moronic ANC, supporting the rogue states of Russia, China, and Iran, are going to get some tough medicine at some point from Trump, and deservedly so.
When you come back to South Africa, we were a non-aligned country, or certainly that's how we try to position ourselves. Can you see that positioning will now get accelerated in future?
Cyril is spineless, but he's isolated. And, I think he is trying to do the right thing with the GNU. But the ANC is not a single voice. You've got communists in the ANC, you've got trade unionists in the ANC, you've got lunatics, incompetents, morons, you've got everyone, clowns, you've got the whole gang. And it's impossible now for Cyril to speak with one voice and represent what the ANC stands for and means. It doesn't stand for anything except corruption, incompetence, and taking money from whoever will give it to them. They're that bunch of prostitutes now. So, on the international front, Iran cleared the ANC's debt. So the ANC is Iran's lapdog, and hence the ICJ court application against Israel, and Iran says jump and the ANC says how high. So for Cyril to swing his group of lunatics to a more centrist position is very difficult when the paymasters are Russia and Iran.
Yeah, brilliant, guys. So we'll just go quickly into the report. The report actually on Daily Maverick is actually done by, I think there were 3 correspondents who actually were speaking about how, Donald Trump's influence on SA might be good for business and all that. I think one of them is Tim Cohen. He speaks about how, what Donald Trump's victory will actually mean for South African business. He says that the most tempting answer is that it will mean very little. Donald Trump's interest and knowledge about not only South Africa, but the continent as a whole is minuscule, right? It's little. Donald Trump doesn't really have a clear understanding of Africa. After all, he actually once called Africa a shithole, sort of like a continent, so to speak, because he doesn't really see the productivity that needs to be coming out of Africa, especially regarding the kind of especially in spite of all the resources, the raw materials that the world actually uses most in its innovative capabilities, yet the zone in which these minerals lies actually really isn't able to articulate how to benefit from those resources. So Donald Trump doesn't really, according to Tim Cohen here, he says Donald Trump's interest and his knowledge about the continent of Africa, and also mostly like in South Africa, is palpably minuscule, all right? It's so little. And his focus has somewhat understandably been on the US's up and coming rival, which is China. Donald Trump's focus is actually China. I remember there was one interview where he had with one of podcasts I like to listen a lot. His name is PBS. Anyway, I remember his name. But he spoke about how the China has been building a really massive, I think, car manufacturing plant in Mexico, which is close to the US. And if that, I think it's going to be one of the largest plants in the world. Okay, and if that plant successfully goes through, the cars that will be flooding in the US, from nearby Mexico would actually rival a lot of the cars that are being built in the US, and even maybe collapse the automobile industry. And so Donald Trump actually, even before he got elected, actually said that he would likely put 1,000% tariff on all of those cars. And so immediately he made that statement, I think the Chinese stopped building that plant in Mexico. So these are the kind of challenges and also tensions between the US and China that actually exist. And we also know the one that actually exists also with NVIDIA. NVIDIA is the technological giant now that is trying to power the supercomputer that will drive the artificial intelligence, generation that we're actually seeing already taking place. And so I think there was some friction between NVIDIA, making chips for China, and how NVIDIA, shouldn't have done that. So I think there were cuts in that relationship, and now China had to depend on its own, I think, Huawei to make its own, supercomputer mechanisms to drive the artificial intelligence era, so to speak. So these are the kind of tensions. So this article here argues that Donald Trump is focused more on his rival, which is China, and not necessarily Africa, as it were. So he said also that this focus on China follows, is also followed. The Donald Trump's focus is on China, then also followed to a certain extent by Europe, and then at a distance, the Middle East and South America. So in Donald Trump's mind, Africa just doesn't feature. All right. So that's what this commentator here speaks about. He says that the focus on China is responsible for one of Trump's very rare, clear economic policy positions, which is the support for higher tariffs, particularly against countries with the net trade surplus versus the US, all right, of which China is by far the most egregious example. So in other words, Donald Trump actually is going to be driving high tariffs with countries that actually have a certain, like a net trade surplus also with the United States, and China really factors in that, probably India a little bit to an extent. So we'll be seeing a lot of higher tariffs, all right, with these countries, and this would be the mechanism by which Donald Trump, I believe, would want to grow the US economy and make it boisterous, as he spoke about in his victory speech yesterday. He said Trump hasn't expressed himself during the campaign on the two important concrete U.S. policies that affect South Africa. And that is, one, PEPFAR. So PEPFAR is actually the U.S. President's emergency plan for AIDS relief, PEPFAR, which actually provides substantial financial support for health programs, and the popular one we all know, AGOA. AGOA has actually raised a lot of tensions between South Africa and the US, and these are the two, PEPFAR and AGOA are the two policies that sort of like connect the US with South Africa directly. And how Donald Trump's victory would affect these two policies, these two agreements, is actually going to be really, really important to understand. AGOA stands for Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, all right? So now he speaks about how that since both programs were maintained during his previous term, they seem likely to continue. Although support for AGOA, essentially a tariff-free grant to African countries, does great against his broad mercantilist policies and also his right-wing tilt. So we know AGOA sort of like has these incubated policies that there will be a tariff-free sort of like trade between the US and Africa, and that actually has been helping South Africa a lot, where a lot of trade has been going on between US and South Africa without these tariffs. But this guy argues here that during Donald Trump's previous term, AGOA was still maintained. So this tariff-free agreement, you see, but now that he's actually going to be going bullish on creating and implementing higher tariffs, one wonders how that would affect the relationship between South Africa and the US in terms of AGOA. So he says here that Donald Trump might seek to renegotiate AGOA's terms to focus on reciprocal trade benefits, especially now that he's really trying to make America great again, as we hear MAGA. So there's also the idea that, the US competition with China might actually help ensure that the policies like PEPFAR and AGOA are maintained out of a US concern that its position on the continent of Africa is threatened, which of course it is. So in other words, because we see now that China is going to be deepening its relationship with African countries now that, the US, especially under Donald Trump rule, might seem to want to be distant from Africa. It kind of like gives more room for Chinese companies to deepen their relationship with, in Africa, get more of the resources they've actually been getting, and probably use that perspective from that wing to really economically grow in that regard. And so that could actually also be a threat for the United States at it were, but you will never know these things. These are kind of like macroeconomic instances. It also says that in a broader sense, the conventional wisdom is now that under a Trump presidency, and also most importantly under a Republican dominated legislature, the US would have a stronger stock market, a stronger dollar, a weaker bond market, and higher inflation. And also in a direct way, he says that this will actually also have effect on South Africa's business because, for importers in general, that news might not be good but for exporters, it might be good. All right. So a stronger dollar, we see that the dollar has been weakening over time now, ever since, the Democrats have actually been in power. I think according to this report that, for importers, it actually has been a sort of like, for now, but with a stronger dollar now, importers would actually have a harder time, while exporters would actually do well because of a stronger dollar. So it also says that, but all of these movements are yet to play out and could easily be influenced by other global events. So US markets have actually responded positively to Donald Trump's victory, and also based perhaps on his pro-business credentials. So because of the fact that, a large percentage of the world know and understand Donald Trump as a capitalist and, somebody who's pro-business, the markets reacted to his victory, and, we saw the, economy growing, the US stock market actually also responding positively to that regard. It says now that, however, also the US economy has grown more or less the same pace, whichever party is in power. So let's see how much Trump would do in his as he wins this election. There's this other guy, Ed Stewart. He speaks about how Donald Trump's victory might not be good news for South Africa. So he says that it's bad news for SA's economy. And why? He says that the return of Trump to the White House is bad news for South Africa's economy. Trump's obsession with tariffs as a panacea for the US economy, which is not in bad shape overall, would be poisonous for trade and by extension the global economy. The roughly 13,000 jobs at risk if AGOA is extricated or torpedoed, or South Africa is excluded from AGOA, are just the tip of the iceberg. So if South Africa is taken away from AGOA, I know there was that debate where South Africa, especially, I think I heard a speech from Thabo Mbeki, started speaking about how, if certain things would not work between the US and South Africa, then maybe South Africa just has to leave AGOA. So that move now, according to this guy, speaks about how that if South Africa is excluded from AGOA, or AGOA is dropped altogether, there will be 13,000 jobs which will be lost. And South Africa already has a really high unemployment rate, about 33.3%. And, losing 13,000 jobs again with this whole AGOA thing would actually be much more detrimental to the economy. And so I think this is a really smart analysis by this commentator. He speaks about how 4 years of chaos, uncertainty, stupidity, and rising geopolitical tensions are a major, if not existential, global economic risk with Donald Trump in place. It says also that in the first indication of the impact of a second Donald Trump term, and how that second Donald Trump term, the impact it will have on South Africa's economy, it says that the rand already on Wednesday morning spiked, okay, and also bonds yielded, right? Emerging market assets also are actually the first casualty of risk aversion among investors. So it says that these entities now, these moves, especially this reaction by South Africa's stock market, may help gold maintain its record price rally. And it's because it says here that gold's record price thrives in a way on chaos. But the precious metals, which are important to South Africa's economy, is a fraction of what it once was. It says about platinum Platinum group metal prices, which have been depressed, recently got a boost when Biden administration asked its allies in the group of 7 to mull imposing sanctions on Russian palladium costs. Now, the Trump administration may not follow on that route, okay? It says that one silver lining for South Africa's economy could be the falling oil prices, as Trump is going to open the floodgates of U.S. oil production. So these are kind of like some thoughts around what, the impacts Donald Trump victory will have on South Africa's economy. It's going to be quite a huge one, a huge task. And, with South Africa's ailing economy in many areas, we're really hoping that the GNU will stand strong and try to really navigate through these uncertainties that are actually spiraling the world. Donald Trump seems to have a much more cordial relationship with President Putin. The whole thing with Ukraine and Russia at this time, probably we might see it either worsen or get better. But whatever the case is, if AGOA is actually extricated because of Donald Trump's new tariff led kind of like worldview, where he wants to place tariffs on many goods coming into the US, South Africa will be affected a lot by that. If AGOA is eradicated, South Africa will also lose a lot of jobs. But then also in terms of the minerals, we know that there's been Joe Biden put a lot of sanctions on Russia's palladium minerals, so to speak. But if Donald Trump lifts those sanctions, because the sanctions which were put on Russia's palladium minerals gave countries like South Africa and countries in the southern part of Africa leverage to sell at appreciable prices and all that. But if those sanctions are lifted up, then they'll have major competition, and then that would also affect sort of like good yield that has actually been coming from trade in those minerals. So these are some changes that we'll likely see. I think I'm actually seeing a really interesting report as well that says that we know that before Donald Trump's election victory, there were lots that were spoken about how the rand has actually been going up because of the government of national unity. Investors are seeing promises in the South African economy, but it says that the rand now tanks. In other words, it went down, especially as Donald Trump was poised to run the White House. And I'm really interested. I don't understand why the rand reacts this way, but it says that the rand was on the ropes on Wednesday morning as America turned blood red. It says that after starting the day at 17.40 rand to the dollar, the currency slid in Asian trade to hit 17.81, which was a loss of 3%, as emerging markets across the board sank to the rising prospects of Donald Trump returning to the White House. This signals that risk aversion among global investors is going through the roof. Uncertainty is high on heightened geopolitical risk, and also a looming wall of US tariffs are bad news for the global economy, especially the emerging markets like in Africa. So it also says that the yield on the benchmark 10-year South African government spiked over 30 basis points on Wednesday morning to 9.66%, further reflection of souring investor sentiment. So investors now, the confidence they had in the GNU seems to be slowly being eroded away by the return of Donald Trump to the White House. And that's one of the things about the market I usually struggle to understand. It says that this is the first indication of what the impact of a second Trump presidency will have on the South African economy, and it doesn't bode well. It says that the fate of the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, is also now uncertain, and with at least 13,000 South African jobs which depend on duty-free access to the US market. So these are kind of like the effects that Donald Trump might have on South Africa's economy, his policies. I don't know, what do you guys think? Let's all learn together, share, let's discuss about these things in the comments. So share your thoughts. What do you think about the impact of Donald Trump's presidency on South Africa's economy? Share your thoughts in the comments.